Wait, what?
I'm going.
Hello, everybody.
Wait. So it gets on the stream. Alright, go.
Hello, everybody. My name's Kimo Gandel, and I'm running for chair of the California College Republicans. At the moment, our state is facing a number of critical crises. For instance, we've already seen in the last election that we face dark times in the polls. We've seen with ballots. We've seen with our candidates. We've seen with our elections that there's a number of terrible tragedies that have occurred. We need strong leadership, policy-driven leadership, those that have values, both consistent to the Republican Party and to themselves, to lead our state forward. We need leaders that emphasize the rule of law, that emphasize not only procedural correctness, which is pedantic and unnecessary, but strong and consistent advocacies. Because we need to be able to go to donors and tell them we're a serious force to be reckoned with. And that means action. Too many times college Republicans veer off. They love to talk. They love to give ambiguous statements, but very rarely do they actually want to tell you how they plan to implement things. That's where our slate is different. So we're here today not only to champion policy and the technicalities, but to champion values, to champion something that too many people in our state are afraid of, to change the Overton window. Here today with me is my running mate, my co-chair, Hannah Stanford, one of the most honorable people I know, and are here to talk about some issues very important to her. Hannah?
Thank you, Kimo. In my opinion, we have drifted. Where in the United States used to be, as Reagan called it, the shining city upon a hill. We've become the depraved vision of the left, with real impacts. We need to shift the Overton window. For instance, it's now forbidden to suggest that unfulfilled women are a result of the lack of traditional family structures in our society. Men are outcasted, viewed as threats, oppressors, or worse. A man holding open a door is now oppression. Asking someone on a date is dehumanization. But if you hook up with them, it's totally okay. And the evidence portrays this. Lack of structure. Divorce rates are at an all-time high. According to a 2017 U.S. Census Bureau, out of about 12 million single-parent families with children under the age of 18, more than 80% were headed by single mothers. While single and divorced parents do their best to provide for their children, the nature of the relationships causes instability for the child. This can lead to relationship problems, behavioral problems, higher suicide rates, and issues with substance abuse. Feminism has misled women into believing that hating men is the answer to freedom, but it has only destroyed the happiness they once possessed. True feminism, however, is supporting women by having their best emotional, personal, and professional interests in mind. It is not what the left claims to provide. Their so-called reproductive rights, closing the supposed age gap, and pressuring women into the workforce. Being a woman entails being traditional, responsible, professional, and fighting the left. Women are rising in politics and the workforce, and we, as college Republicans, need to train them in their fight because the left claims to be their party when they so clearly are not. We must, as well, undermine the leftist assumptions that are so often accepted by our own side. Leftist creations such as hookup culture and the dismantling of traditional marriage incentivize women to grow the government as men become replaced by bureaucratic agencies seeking to fill the empty void. Alienation, loneliness, and mental health are not going to be solved by expanding government institutions. It starts with the home, the family.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So at this time, we're going to be taking some questions. We always believe it's important to access you, the audience. And the reason, of course, is transparency. So often our administrations get locked into their own circles, their own echo chambers, that they're unable to access you, the college Republicans. We're here to answer the hard questions, the tough ones. So, Pon, can we please have some questions?
Yeah, so the first question is for Hannah.
Yes.
Hannah, when did you first join the college Republicans?
I was loosely involved my freshman year, but I came to convention with our now president, Roberta Martin, of the Cal Poly College Republicans. Sophomore year, I was a little bit more involved, but honestly not as involved as I should have been. And I ran for treasurer of the club, actually, because I wanted to get more involved. And then junior year, and then also this year I am treasurer of the Cal Poly College Republicans.
So Hannah, I'm guessing you too remember the Lisa election back then.
I do, actually.
Things were crazy.
They were.
That's what happens when you have irresponsible leaders, irresponsible administrations, unable to fulfill the basic jobs they need. And that's where responsible and consistent leadership becomes important. Hannah and I were both there when Lisa both failed elections, failed to continue running the state, failed to provide a budget. We saw the tangible budget impacts of that between 2015 and 2016, as I showed in our prior discussion. We raised less than half of what we raised in less than one term under the current administration. Having stable and consistent leadership, thus, is one of the most important features of a successful administration. Mr. Frisiakis?
And the next question that I can see on here is from Clay Smith. He's asking, how does a discussion about culture lead to victories for Republican candidates?
Sure, I can start with that. The first one has to do with our advocacies. If you're not able to turn that Overton window, at some point the left is going to take so much moral ground that we're going to be unable to move forward. They're going to make certain advocacies just untalkable. There'll be moral travesties. There'll be presumptions behind them that make it impossible to talk. We see that with illegal immigration. I was at Politicon and I asked a question. For instance, I said, ma'am, if the Congressional Budgetary Office has shown, in fact, under President Obama, that illegal aliens take over $100 billion every year from social services, from the states, away from communities, how can we possibly say illegal immigration is a stable and solvent policy? And of course, she just basically read out at me and started screaming that I was a racist, things like that. That's just one example. When we concede moral ground, and as later, we're actually going to be bringing on a special guest to talk about this, but we see with abortion, they've taken abortion from a tangible issue to one of reproductive rights, to where even talking about regulating abortion becomes a matter of taking rights away from women, from being an oppressor, a patriarch, things such as that. So if we don't talk about the moral issues, we simply will cease to be Republicans.
Yeah, also, if we live in a culture where you can't talk about certain issues, they become completely off limits to politicians, and we need to be asking Democrats these questions, but they have completely made them, unanswerable. We can't ask those questions anymore, so they're kind of, they don't have to answer those questions anymore. Democrats don't have to, so we need to change that.
Pon?
Alrighty. So, if you had to give any criticisms of the current administration for Ariana, what would they be?
Well, of course, and Ari and I have had a lot of disagreements in the past. I think we need to be more pro-unity, and sometimes that's hard. Sometimes that's breaking bread with your enemies. I myself have done that in the past. And yes, we have disagreements. A few days ago, I had dinner with Mr. Andrew Gates. And you know what? Even though we had disagreements, I'm glad we did it. Because at the end of the day, it's still about reaching out to people. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes we wish we can just rather ignore them. But that'll never happen. Yes, it's important to enforce the rules. Yes, it's important to act professionally and responsibly. And yes, as chair, I will make sure that happens. But at the same time, I understand I will constantly have people disagreeing with me. And the only way to do that, as the biblical notion went, with Jesus breaking bread with the tax man, is to come together and sit down with them for a good American meal.
Yeah, I think our board right now hasn't been as effective as it could have been due to the issue of unity, and I think that we can do a better job with that.
Alright, here's a really open and wholesome non-policy question. It's simply, Hannah, what do you enjoy about knitting?
It's really relaxing, takes your mind off things, and it doesn't take a lot of concentration. I don't know, it's fun, it's wholesome, it's traditional, so.
Traditional values, I like it.
Alrighty. So, could you go into perhaps, Hannah, could you perhaps go into something about what you talked about earlier on? So like your pro-family stance, for instance. What exactly is that to you? How do you define that?
Okay, so under kind of traditional values, I think that we need to be pro-family, and that means supporting the family unit. That can be supporting women at home. I think women nowadays get shamed for staying at home a lot of the times because we are pressured to go into the workforce and make a lot of money. But women can go into the workforce if they want to, and that's super great. But we need to support both sides and help mothers who are working and help them, show them the best ways to support the family while working, and just kind of support both sides.
Exactly, and another thing going off that, there's tangible economic issues that come into effect here. The government, through providing welfare services, through funding abortions, they literally have state-funded degeneracy at campuses. They do things like fund the abortion pill, which has, sometimes medical uses, I understand, even with, for instance, birth control. That has medical use behind it. But it's not being used for that. It's being incentivized by the state through an economic contract to undermine people's ability to actually engage fairly in the marketplace. So you kind of have, as many economicists would call it, a marketplace of relationships. And the fact is, if the government subsidizes certain behavior, that behavior begins to repeat itself. It begins to reproduce. And while they claim that's social mobility, in the long term, it only leads to a number of impacts. And we saw that with what Hannah brought up before, right? You see with a lot of single mothers, which are largely created because you have this A, welfare state, and B, state that tells women, oh, you don't need a man. You have that right in your university institutions. You have that even in what your insurance policies end up looking like. These little subtle economic factors that begin to play in. And those are basically the state trying to incentivize a behavior. Now, we do that even in less tangible things. You do that with cigarettes, right? They tax cigarettes. Or alcohol. They don't want you to drink alcohol. They're beginning to do that with the family. Because if you don't have a family, your loyalties shift, right? So, whereas before my primary loyalty would be to my wife, my family, people like that, it becomes the state. Because the breadwinner changes. That is what is so dangerous. So, of course, social norms are important, and that's the first step. The second step is tearing down these terrible economic structures built by leftists, incentivizing degeneracy.
This next question is verbatim from Justin Sexton, and this is for Chemo.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about the way Nick Steinwinder and the Cal Lutheran CRs were treated by Ariana?
Well, I will say Mr. Steinwinder and Ariana did not get along. If you go back and read that case, Ms. Rowlands actually tried to file an injunction to just get him thrown out of the organization quite early on. That, of course, was rejected by the Judicial Board. I will say, of course, though, Mr. Steinwinder did not want to show up. He was told, because he had membership lists which were vital for holding convention at that time, to surrender those lists, and he decided never to do so. So when it comes down to the Steinwinder case, it's not a case about, how you were treated and stuff like that. Steinwinder purposefully wanted to be purged. He literally trapped himself in a location where he had no ability to do so. People believing that Steinwinder and Cal Lutherans left the organization, which formally they didn't even explicitly decharter, but those who believe that haven't been informed of the issues. In fact, Cal Lutheran were not even penalized by the Judicial Board. It was only Mr. Steinwinder who took valuable state property and refused to turn it over. Not only is that reprehensible, it damages our notions of a peaceful transition of power, right? So, for instance, if my opponent wins the election, I would absolutely support Ms. Rowlands giving him all of our materials and state property. All of it, undamaged. That did not happen with the transition between Lisa and Ari. State property was damaged, obstruction occurred, and that's a problem. Because if we don't have a peaceful transition of power, we don't have a democracy. So to answer that question, simply put, it was a responsible reaction to an undemocratic force attempting to obstruct a peaceful transition.
All right, here's a question for Hannah from Victoria Ann Harper. So what if you have single mothers because Republican men leave them? How do Republicans support single mothers like me?
I think that a Republican man is not necessarily indicative of the Republican Party as a whole. So just because one man does something doesn't mean that the party can't support her or support you. I think that we need, by promoting more traditional values in our society, then we wouldn't be having Republican men leaving their wives, because that shouldn't happen. Divorce shouldn't be happening. Marriage is sacred and something that needs to be held as sacred, and our society doesn't hold it as being sacred anymore. So I think by changing the way that our society views marriage and views traditional values, we change the minds of people in California, in our country, around the world.
And that comes in two tangible ways. I'm going to give my hot take of the night: at-will divorce laws, right? They were established, in fact, by Reagan. It's where you can get a divorce without having to prove anything in a court of law. And that's highly problematic. No longer is, the relationship taken as what it is, which in part, even the Bible describes it this way in Genesis as an exchange, a contractual agreement between you and your spouse and, of course, God. So at the end of the day, the problem is, divorce now, marriage, is something more like dating somebody. That's how it's viewed in our society. And that's tragic, because they're for different purposes. Dating is to decide if you want to marry somebody. But after you marry somebody, you take on a new purpose. And the purpose, simply put, and what it should be, is to raise and rear children. And once you have a child, you absolutely cannot just decide to cut it off. It's immoral, it's reprehensible. Children need stable parents. And that's what, my co-chair was talking about. Too many times we see single mothers, which it's a tragedy in our society, and I would condemn Republican men, if they happen to be Republican, who commit adultery. And I would even go as far to argue, if you commit adultery on your spouse and you decide not to repent from it, you're not very conservative. It's easy to call yourself a Republican, you can register as one, but that doesn't mean you hold those values. If you are consistent, then you're going to adopt policies and actions that result in that consistency. I'm not so much worried, as my opponents might say, of regulating, your dating behaviors. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me, and I'm sure what matters to Hannah, is that in the long term, the aggregate, people are raising and rearing successful children. And if we don't have that in society, we won't have a successful future. So the response to that is remove these structural problems like at-will divorce laws or universities encouraging women to be single, strong, independent women. That is the first step.
All right. I've noticed a pattern with a couple individuals. They want to know how some of these policy discussions tie into CCR. Can you elaborate? And this is a question for both of you.
Perfect. So I can answer that question first. So tangibly codifying something, that's a good question. That's my specialty as a parliamentarian, right? So the first one, when it comes down to traditional values, we can do things like provide activism on university campuses opposing policies. Later, we're going to go all over the abortion stuff, especially because soon abortion is going to be a centerpiece on campuses, as it's literally mandated by the state. No longer even incentivized, mandated. That's one of them. The second one is pushing our party to continue to shift the Overton window. Let's be real here. The majority of advocacies, especially moral advocacies, begin largely with the youth at the university level. That's especially true now. With the collapse of the establishment, we increasingly see these youth-born advocacies take hold in the status quo. So it's important we begin to support policies that reflect that. And we do that through a number of ways. We have a platform for one, we lobby CRP for another, we support and appropriate resources towards politicians that are going to help us as a third. But mostly relevant to me coming into an off year where there aren't elections to appropriate resources to, it's creating a stable structure, not only in 2020 to win that election, but to advocate and change the moral compass on the university.
For CR specifically, part of what I want to do is to help train college Republican women, especially, like I was saying before, the left claims to be the party for women, and it's hard as a man to tell women what they should do, how they should act. A lot of the left's response is just, well, you don't know what it's like, you're not me, you're not even a woman, how could you ever understand? So it's really important to have girls and college Republicans trained to attack the left and to attack their policies that they promote as being pro-woman when they're really not. Also, part of what I want to do to promote professionalism in women in CRs is to hold events from other women in politics, other leaders, working moms, people like that, to help train both college Republican men and women. So on a more practical level, helping individual college Republican chapters promote the values that we seek to promote.
All right, this next question is for Hannah. It's from Andrew Gates.
Awesome.
And the question is he says, our region, so he's referring to Central Coast.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying it, even though it has a couple very successful clubs, he's referring to SLO and UCSB, I assume.
Right.
He's saying that it used to be much larger, though, in terms of the number of chartered chapters. He wants to know, what is your plan to work towards expanding the Central Coast region?
Okay. Yeah, our region used to be a lot bigger than it used to be. Part of that is electing a good Central Coast RVC, and we have Caroline Martin from Cal Poly, who I believe and we believe will do an amazing job at getting clubs chartered. That includes going to club meetings, going on the college campuses of places like Westmont, and other colleges within our region. Pepperdine used to be big. Cuesta College is a community college near us. Allen Hancock is another community college near SLO. And we have been really focused in the past on rebuilding San Luis Obispo, rebuilding our club, because we used to not be that big. But at the end of this year and next year, our main focus will be trying to make Central Coast bigger and trying to expand what has worked for our club and helping other clubs. And I think Caroline Martin will do a great job at that.
Yeah, and just to build off that, we see what happened at SLO empirically is evidence of that. They're one of the largest chapters in the state. They've done so much good work for the California College Republicans. They had a massive panel event there last year. It's simply factual that they're one of the most successful chapters, and that's why they're on my slate, and that's why they're on board.
Our next question is for Chemo. It's from Kevin Michael Silverman. Do you think pushing the trad conservative platform will appeal to moderate or centrist students that support Trump?
So, first off, yes, I do believe it will. One reason, we want to convince people. Part of it being in an off year of the California College Republicans is not just walking for politicians. You might have noticed even Ariana, who's known as, the very radical, out there activist type, was quieter during the election year because that's what the party wanted. We won't have the reins of the party on us during an off year. My goal during an off year is to convert people to real conservative traditional Republicans. We will have, of course, our slight pivots during the election year to talk to moderates. And of course, I myself have a lot of moderate policies. I'm not even sure what constitutes a moderate. What I am sure is what constitutes a conservative. If you think about moderates even from a political science perspective, the majority of literature states it's not so much that people are moderates, it's just that they have certain leftist and certain right-wing policies. But they're never really in the middle. They're just on both sides. I hope to bring people who have leftist policies to the right. Not that people in the center are wrong, but that's that we want to shift that overtone window, because that's the discussion of morality. And without that discussion of morality, we're going to lose what it means to be Republicans. So really, the reason of the platform, yes, conversion is part of it, but it's also to protect the ideas of being Republican for the future. We as conservatives are attempting to conserve an ideal. That ideal, of course, has roots amongst a multitude of places. We have, for instance, Judeo-Christian values. On the other hand, we also have classical liberal values. We have a great balance that creates a non-coercive society, which, as St. Augustine allowed us to say, helps us to live as better people. Pon?
Of course. So, specifically, how do you guys plan on getting chapters such as Cal Lutheran, Channel Islands, Pepperdine, etc., to be able to essentially recharter into CCR?
Like how technically, or how am I going to convince them?
How do you convince them? What's your plan on convincing them?
Right, so people who've had, each chapter is contextually different. I would say the most difficult one, because I want to tackle these problems head on, Cal Lutheran. Of course, Mr. Steinwinder, he literally sent an email back to Hannah saying, I will never support the current administration. I can't change somebody's mind who won't sit down with me. I just can't do it. It's not possible. And a bigger problem coming from this, I think, is the discourse emerging. Because there's this implicit idea that we should always negotiate with terrorists. Just because a chapter is pointing a gun at their head and saying, oh, we're going to decharter if you don't completely radically change your policy platform. That's not conducive. Of course, we'll sit down, we'll talk with these chapters, we'll incentivize them. As I said before, we're going to raise money like never before to provide more money for the chapters to do more activism, more membership kits. But I'm not going to be concerned with trying to change the minds of people who just blatantly hate us, that are so consumed with anger, they won't sit down and talk. What I am interested in is starting new chapters, bringing in new people to the College Republicans, rather than just trying to rehash old rivalries with the old guard. And to be frank, the majority of these people are retiring. It's time to start new chapters, new legacies, a new future for CCR. Hannah, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I think that what you were saying earlier about negotiating with terrorists, we can't be compromising our values, because then what are our values? We can talk with them and show them why it is better to be chartered, show them the materials that we have, the things that we can supply to them, but ultimately we can't force them to be a part of CCR. We can do our best to show them why it is better, and we can, go on the college campuses and talk with them. But I think it is more beneficial to be starting new chapters and people who are excited to be a part of this organization, because this organization can be great and do amazing things if we have the people who are willing to support it, to help it.
This question is for Chemo from Sheridan Nolan. What are your majors and how do you intend to implement your studies as CR chair?
Right, so my major is in political science, but that's not what I spend the majority of my time on. I spend the majority of my time not only studying the law and parliamentary procedure, but practical organizational theory. That includes how we structure organizations to maximize efficiency, practicalities like that, logistics, right? Because sometimes the end of the day, being a chair is a lot of boring number crunching. At the end of the day, you have to look how much money you need to raise, you need to make calls. It's experience. And I'll tell you this, being president of the College Republicans at UCI has taught me way more than my 3 years cumulative of college education has taught me. Being in the field, that's what matters. So yes, I've studied political science. I understand the theories, as I went over before, where moderate voters are, things such as that. Understanding the application then of theory to practice, we see with my organization studies, I look at how committee structures work and things such as that. But at the end of the day, it's just the number crunching. You got to call people, you got to be out in the field, you got to be willing to devote the time. Being chair is a sacrifice. And I'll be honest, I'm putting myself out there a lot, spending a lot of late nights. My GPA will probably suffer, I'm not going to lie. That's just the reality of it. And people who aren't willing to accept that aren't ready to be chair. The majority of chairs in the past actually have graduated. They weren't in college at the time of their chairmanship because of how much time it takes. But I'm willing to make that sacrifice. And the reason is I'm not here for myself. In fact, I stumbled into this position. I was never one looking for power, things like that. I was never the co-chair before. I was just the parliamentarian. I was just looking at procedures. I came into this as a response to negotiating, for instance, with people who don't hold our values. And I'm willing to debate them on that, but I'm here because I'm concerned. I'm here because I care. And honestly, I wouldn't be the president of the College Republicans. I wouldn't be running for chairman if I wasn't. And that's why I'm here.
All right.
Is that for Hannah too, or just for me? Or
If Hannah has something to say, she can.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually majoring in child development with a minor in psychology. And that might not seem to apply to politics. And like chemo, I kind of stumbled into this. It wasn't something that I always dreamed of doing. It wasn't something that I was strategically climbing the ladder to try and get to. But I saw a real need to do what I'm doing, and I saw the real need to show people why the right is right, and to help California, because California is going to the left. And I don't think it has to. I think we can make a real difference, and I think we can change the minds of people. So.
Okay. Our next question is from Madison Amelia Marks Noble. She wants to know, how do you guys plan to fundraise money, and what is your relationships with groups such as the OCGOP on fundraising?
Oh, perfect. That's actually a great question. So as I said in my prior speech before, we have a number of policies regarding this. I made my pledge before that I do not intend for the California College Republicans to target donor groups that chapters need. That means I'm not going to go to the Lincoln Club and take your funds. I'm not going to threaten you at your regional level. What I am going to do, for instance, is hold a number of fundraisers at CRP. What I am going to do, for instance, is bring in a large number of new donors. I'm going to call large businesses. I'm going to cut deals. One of the things I was actually looking into was how A, we can open an investment account, but B, we can call large corporations and get them to, sell us membership cards. So when you buy something, we get 1.5% back. I don't know, something like that. Those are ways to raise money. Bringing in new donors, making a lot of calls, accessing my donor list, calling people. Of course, we have to negotiate with CRP. Those are ways to access new donors. Now, I will make a pretty firm commitment that the California College Republicans, while we of course will go to the OCGOP, as we will every central committee, we're not going to take away funds from local chapters. CRUCI is not going to be threatened by the existence of the state org here. Yes, a disproportionate number of donors may come from the southern region, but no, we're not going to take away funds from those local chapters because then we prevent them from being successful. The rest of the state cannot benefit off the backs of the southern region. Same goes for the Bay Area, where there's also a large number of donors, or the capital region. All of those regions have to equally contribute. And of course, that'll be through a number of ways, as I already listed. Reasonable financial policy, especially when it comes down to fundraising, the practical logistics. We have fundraisers, we have annual donor conferences at CRP. We need to start doing things like that, reaching out to people directly. Sometimes it requires us to be a little aggressive. I'm okay to do that. I'm okay to be smart in my aggression, but I'm okay to engage in those behaviors in order to raise us more money. Because at the end of the day, we need more money or we're not going to be successful.
Yeah, previously we've had to get out of debt and then make more money, and now that we're at a pretty good place, I think it is really important to develop strong donor lists and just to really reach out all the time. We don't right now have a financial committee, which I think would be very beneficial because I don't think that it should just fall on one person. I think there needs to be a group of people coming up with new ideas, new fundraising ideas, because the more minds working together, the greater we can be. So we really need to develop our donor list, make calls, and do basically what Chemo said.
Yeah, and Hannah's the treasurer right now. She's made hundreds of calls to people. And part of it is actually just getting people to donate on a consistent basis. Those $5 donations per month begin to add up as you have enough people. Reaching out to these organizations, in fact, actually, eventually, and I hope to endorse a good chairman candidate for the CRP. Those are ways to begin to access consistent donor bases. Get those people to donate little sums of money every month. That's the first way we tackle this.
All right. Sarah Morcott has a question. Her question is, what is Champion CCR's plan to be able to increase relations with the CRP?
Perfect. So, one way we plan to do that, of course, we have to engage more. In the past, we've never had delegates to CRP. The adults don't know what we're doing. We don't have a, consistent line of communication with adults. Those are important advocacies to start. Because if we don't start just interacting with them on a basic level, then we're never going to be able to progress in a way that we're able to access them. This is not only an institutional problem, it's a personal one. You need to be able to talk to top CRP officials at the same time. I'm not going to compromise our values just because CRP tells us to. There's a balancing act here. Applying to CRP, getting CRP to be happy with us 100% of our time is not the prerogative of the California College Republicans. It's part of it, it's not all of it. Balancing the concerns of my constituents is much more important to me than shilling to some old people at the top of the hierarchy. Now, I would love to be in good relations with them, and I will try. I've done a great job with CRUCI and the county party here in Orange County. We've done a spectacular job. Fred Whitaker's a great guy. I'm friends with almost all the people on their board. I go to Republican Women's Federated meetings. I don't know anybody in the party who would say, oh, I hate that Chemo guy for whatever he's doing. I don't know anybody like that because it's just being reasonable with them. It's about talking to them about policy. It's about showing them that the youth are the future. Part of having a good relationship with CRP is showing them we're useful. Because if we're not useful, then they won't care about us. I would even label it as CRP doesn't have a hostile intent towards us as much as an apathetic. Kind of like, we don't want to touch them. Not so much like, oh, they're a problem. Because we do a lot of walking for them. We do a lot of the work for them. They realize our use. But it's time to monetize that in a way that they can become useful to us, not just us being useful to them. Because if that's the case, then there's no point in us shilling constantly to them. It has to be a two-way road here.
All right. Madison has a question for Hannah.
Yes.
How much money have you fundraised since you've been treasurer?
I actually haven't put it all into a direct number, but around 3,000, I'd say.
You should also note that the fundraising year is a little low right now. Since Hannah's become treasurer, it was during the middle of the election cycle, and the majority of the funds then were going directly to candidates. We're also instructed usually by the party, especially as the election cycles are near at their height, not to go about and aggressively pursue donors that are needed for candidates. Obviously, it's unfortunate tons of money went to candidates that didn't win, but regardless, we should always support those candidates. Of course, both Hannah and Ariana have in the past aggressively pursued donors, and we've been successful. $3,000 is actually pretty good. If you think about it, that's actually almost a third of what was raised during Ivy's administration. So if you think about it, Hannah's actually done a spectacular job, especially at expanding our donor list and just getting that contact out there.
I've also only been treasurer since September, so it's only been a couple months.
Exactly.
All right. Next question is for Chemo. Quite a number of our viewers have actually wanted to know this.
This sounds like a fun question.
Who are you supporting for CRNC chair?
Definitely not Chandler Thornton. So the answer is going to be somebody who's not Chandler Thornton. And I'll give you an easy reason. Now, I'm going to take a drink on this one. So we had quite a fun time at the CRNC. I would say one of the most impactful things that emerged out of that was the fact that they didn't want to disclose the debt at all. If you're so desperate with your fundraising that you don't want to disclose the debt, then we're in some serious problems. And you know what? Last time, I had my numbers here last time to explain all of it, but we found out that they actually owed somewhere between like $3 million if you look at the IRS statistics on it. It's ridiculous. And we're making, $1 million a year? So we have a debt 3 times bigger than our income. And then on top of that, we have no idea what we're paying on interest, what we're paying on principal. The entire system's screwed up. And we actually had Charlie Corrine, he's the treasurer, and he came up and gave his report and he said, I have no idea what our financial state is. That's a very scary thing to tell us. And then Chandler goes up there, stumbles through a speech about how he's going to give $125,000 out to some ambiguous research firm. And then when I try to question him, they change the rules so I can't. It's just disgusting that we're not willing to engage in these conversations. Now, yes, some people are like, oh, it was off-putting. You guys need a slap to the face. You need some cold water. Because y'all in the national, y'all in your other states, clearly don't see that this national organization, it's sinking slowly. Do you remember when Trump said, drain the swamp? So I'm going to put my same motto on that for the CRNC. When CRNC's convention comes around, I'm not only going to drain that swamp, I'm going to stop it from existing unless it can show it's responsible. If you thought I was bad at the BOD meeting, wait till you see convention when I have a lot of delegates. And I'm just going to make this clear. I'm sure you're watching this, Chandler. I want a responsible chairman. I do not want somebody who's too chicken to come out and tell us the state of the organization. That's to censor me because they don't want to listen to the amount of money being presented. That has to actually silence people on your own side because you're not willing to have the guts to censure me because you are too scared of the controversy. Of course, this might sound angry to a lot of constituents who don't know, but this is our future. And it's dying because somebody's taking $100K out, which is, by the way, what we pay associate lawyers just to run the CRNC. I'm paid nothing as chair, and yet the CRNC is paid what a lawyer is going to be. Not saying you're corrupt, Chandler, but you know what? It's suspicious. All right, let's get on to the next question.
Right.
That was
like it.
That was Chemo's time telling you my hot take on the CRNC. I've never seen an institution so bad as them. I'm a registered parliamentarian, and they tell me when to run, and that's one where you start running. The fact that Burke hasn't started already is beyond me. But, the guy couldn't even tell me what the debate rules were, so it's surprising to me the old man hasn't fallen off his seat yet. Let's go.
Alrighty. This is from Sawhill. It's a slight difference here. Do you have someone that's running for chair of CRP that you support? Do you have a position on that race?
So, this has to be my CIA moment in all of this. I can neither confirm nor deny the state's position. The reason is both Hannah and I are on the state. We need a cohesive policy when it comes to supporting CRP candidates, because the impacts from that are going to be real. I'll just put it framely, and I would encourage Matt to do the same. I will not support any CRP delegate until the executive board decides. Having a cohesive, basically what is this, CCR's foreign policy is one of the most important aspects to engaging with the CRP. Because if we don't do that, and we have an inconsistent foreign policy, people are going to think we're all over the place. We'll never be able to access those donor bases. So I can neither confirm nor deny who we're going to be supporting in the upcoming races. I will say I will support the candidate that most strongly supports the youth, and I will be contacting the candidates over winter break on coming onto our California College Republicans page and making their pitch to the constituents. We'll do an open poll, and of course bring it before the executive board to decide who to endorse. And I will respect whoever we endorse, and I will support them at the CRP, as I'm sure Hannah will, and whoever else we bring as delegates.
Question for Hannah.
Yes.
What is one thing you would like to change about CCR?
I think we need to be more effective as a whole. I think we need to be more effective at. We've done a really great job. It was an election cycle, so we did a really great job at doing deployments and getting college Republicans to those places to help our local politicians. But now that it's an off year, we need to really focus on building our chapters, helping our chapters out. We're able to give some chapter boxes, but definitely not enough. I know our chapter ran out pretty quickly, and that has to do again with fundraising. I think we need to fundraise, and then we also need to teach each individual chapter how to fundraise and really just build our constituency, because we could have a lot of members at our meetings and in our club chapters in general.
Okay. Question for both of you. What is one way that we can, or multiple ways, that we can expand CCR and get more chapters?
Want to answer that first? I can take that. Okay. The best way is through incentives. That's the only way that's been proven to empirically work, and I'll tell you why. We all have these fancy policies about outreach, stuff like that. That's good and dandy. But at the end of the day, people need supplies. We see increasingly, and I see this amongst almost everybody, that there's this kind of pivot to TPUSA, pivot to YAF, and the reason at the end of the day is because those organizations can provide better resources. If we don't have the resources, people aren't going to want to join. Yes, I've convinced many good people, including Paloma, who's actually on our slate, to form a college Republican chapter because they can access the state party, access direct legislative advocacies, stuff like that. That's good and dandy. But the majority of CRs are going to be thinking about their wallets. So it has to, first most, do with solvency at the state level. It's just the raw practicality of things. Of course, secondly, it's having effective regional vice chairs. I plan to follow a model close to how SLO works. They have one of the most successful amounts of, socials, high levels of membership, things such as that, which help us create an effective statewide organization. We apply what happens at the chapter level to the state level. And that, happens through a multitude of codifications. We amend the budget to give more money to regions and less money to the state bureaucracy, which I've always been a part of. I believe strongly that the higher up the hierarchy you go, the less efficient things become. I think that's just a centerpiece of conservative policy in general. At the same time, I also recognize there's some things that are efficient at the state level. Legitimacy of advocacies. We can broadcast the whole state, chapters can only broadcast locally. Fundraising. We're the ones who speak for the whole state. People want to donate in that manner. So in those ways, we can maximize what we're good at, and chapters can maximize what they're good at. And of course, we're going to be bringing on, through other Fireside chats, specific RVCs. They're the ones who need to expand chapters. I can only do so much. I'm going to help as much as I can in Southern Region. I've done a lot. I've helped Paloma get on board. I'm restarting new chapters across Southern Region, but I can't do it alone. My RVCs are my greatest tool. As I'm sure Matt will say the same, RVCs are the ones who make the difference in the region, not just the top of the executive board.
Yeah, we can't individually be going to every single region. We can do our best, but that's what the RVCs are there for. And we have some great options in our slate for RVC. Paloma, for example, has been brought up. She's done a lot of activism with TPUSA, but Kima was able to convert her over to our side, which is good for us.
Exactly.
And it's getting those smaller chapters started. Like, even if they only have 20 members, even if they have 5 or 10 members.
Cut. Sorry, guys. We're losing connection. We're at.
No.
Hold on. Just wait. It's coming back.
Oh, it's
Wait,
coming
Kima,
back.
what's your
1548.
1548?
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
Oh, drink the
You guys
shit.
are doing
I know.
great, though.
Just
Alright, I'm
chill
gonna grab
and
a
then-
brush.